Most serial killers stalk their victims in the dark. They wait in alleys, watch bus stops, circle parks, and lonely roads. Their biggest problem is getting close. Maxim Vladimirovich Petrov never had that problem. He did not stalk from the shadows. He walked up the stairs, rang the bell, and waited for the door to open. To his victims, he did not look like a predator. He looked like a solution. It is a cold morning in St. Petersburg. The stairwell is damp and smells of metal, mold, and old paint. Behind one of the doors, an elderly person struggles to breathe, each step to the kitchen feeling heavier than the last. The doorbell rings. On the other side stands a man in a worn winter coat, carrying a medical bag. Inside the bag there is a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, some documents, and a small collection of ampules and syringes that could change a life in seconds. "Good afternoon," he says politely. "I'm from the clinic. We need to check your lungs after the x-ray." He knows your name. He knows your address. He knows your diagnosis. And he knows you have been waiting for help. You open the door. He moves around the flat like he has done it hundreds of times. He does not rush. He does not seem nervous. He comments on the weather, on your cough, on how hard these times are for old people. He wraps the cuff around your arm and pumps it up, watching the needle tremble. He listens to your chest through the stethoscope, making small, thoughtful noises, the kind that make patients feel they are being taken seriously. Then he says the line he has already tested on many others. "Your pressure is unstable. I'll give you an injection. You'll feel better very soon." The syringe goes in. You feel a sting, then warmth spreading through your arm and chest. Your limbs grow heavy. Your thoughts slow down, as if the world is being wrapped in cotton. From somewhere far away, you hear him open drawers, the soft clink of jewelry, a cupboard door, a gas knob being turned. You want to stand up and tell him to stop, but nothing moves. Hours later, smoke will pour into the stairwell. Neighbors will shout, fire trucks will arrive, and firefighters will carry a body out of a blackened apartment. The paperwork will call it a tragic fire and a natural death. No one will write what really happened, that the last person you saw alive was a doctor who came to kill you. His name was Maxim Vladimirovich Petrov. He was a registered doctor, an educated man, and one of the most chilling examples of how trust itself can be turned into a weapon. Petrov did not start his life as a monster. On paper, his story looks like millions of others born in the Soviet Union. He was born in 1965, when the Soviet system still seemed solid and permanent. Children went to pioneer camps, parents had stable jobs, and the future appeared predictable, if not easy. From a young age, he was described as quiet and intelligent. He was not the kind of boy who got into fights or shouted in the yard. Teachers noticed his discipline and his ability to memorize information, both useful traits for a future doctor. In the Soviet Union, medicine was a prestigious path. Doctors were considered part of the educated elite. For many families, having a son become a doctor meant social respect, stability, and a sense that he was doing something important. Petrov studied hard, went through medical school, and earned his right to wear the white coat. He was trained to read X-rays, interpret symptoms, and make decisions that could save or end lives. Then the country that trained him collapsed. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union disappeared almost overnight. In its place came a new Russia: free market chaos, hyperinflation, unpaid salaries, and crime woven into daily life. Hospitals struggled. Doctors often went months without proper pay. Some left the profession, others took bribes. Many simply tried to endure. By the mid-1990s, Petrov was working as a doctor in St. Petersburg, assigned to a health center and dealing primarily with patients who had lung problems. On paper, he was doing exactly what he had been trained to do, caring for vulnerable patients in a difficult time. But inside that role, something else was growing, a knowledge of just how helpless his patients really were. He saw their flats, their loneliness, their isolation. He saw their tiny pensions, the cheap food on their tables, the outdated pills in their kitchen cupboards. He saw how quickly they agreed to whatever a doctor told them. And at some point, Petrov learned one more thing. A doctor's access to patients can be abused in ways ordinary criminals can only dream of. Every predator needs a way to find prey. Most serial killers search, experiment, make mistakes. Petrov never had to search. The system handed him a ready-made catalog. While working with lung patients, he gained access to a list. People who had undergone chest X-rays, fluorography, and were flagged for follow-up. These were mostly older individuals with chronic respiratory problems, people whose bodies were already failing them. The list contained names, addresses, and medical information. To one set of eyes, it was a tool for treatment. To Petrov's eyes, it was something else. A map of vulnerable, isolated people spread across St. Petersburg. We do not know the exact moment when his thinking crossed the line from doctor to hunter, but the structure of his later crimes shows how deeply he understood what this list could do for him. It told him where his targets lived. It told him their age and general health. It told him which patients were likely to be alone during the day. In the late 1990s, many families in Russia were juggling work, multiple jobs, and survival. Adult children often left their elderly parents alone in small flats for most of the day. These were the hours when Petrov knew he could strike. Armed with the list, he did not need to follow anyone, watch anyone, or risk approaching strangers. He could arrive with a perfect cover story. "I'm the doctor from your clinic. I saw your X-ray. I'm here to help." All he had to do was knock. When Petrov first started using the list, he did not immediately jump to murder. He tested the waters with a series of robberies disguised as medical care. Around 1997, he began visiting patients on the list without being invited. He chose times when relatives were likely away, weekday mornings and early afternoons. He introduced himself calmly as a doctor from their clinic and referred to their recent X-rays, which instantly lowered suspicion. Inside the flat, the performance began. He listened to their breathing. He checked their pulse. He complained about how overloaded the health system was, about how many patients he had to see. He created a bubble of normalcy. Then he suggested an injection to stabilize your condition, or so you don't get worse. What he injected was not medicine in the healing sense. It was a drug chosen to make the patient unconscious or so weak they could not move or think clearly. While they drifted into darkness, Petrov began his real work. He searched drawers, wardrobes, cupboards, pockets of jackets hanging in the hallway. He took cash, small electronics, gold jewelry, family heirlooms, anything that could be converted into money. Sometimes he stole even trivial items, packets of coffee, tea, cheap ornaments. It showed how little he respected the people whose trust he exploited. For the victims, the experience was like being erased from their own life for a few hours. They would lose consciousness in their own kitchen or bedroom and wake up later with no idea how much time had passed. They felt weak and disoriented, with strange gaps in memory. Only gradually did they notice missing things. Some blamed their failing memory. Some suspected relatives or neighbors. Very few dared imagine that the doctor himself had robbed them. Between 1997 and 1999, Petrov is believed to have carried out dozens of these attacks. Later, investigators linked him to about 47 robberies committed using injections during house calls. Each successful robbery reinforced one message in his mind. This works. The system will not stop you. No one is even sure what happened. The full horror of what Petrov was doing only becomes clear when you look at individual stories. In one case, an elderly woman remembered the doctor arriving politely and offering an injection to make her feel stronger. She said yes. She remembered the prick of the needle and then nothing. When she woke up, she could not breathe. The flat was full of thick, bitter smoke. Heat pressed against her skin. Furniture crackled and collapsed as flames spread. She staggered towards the balcony, screaming for help. Neighbors saw her and called the fire brigade. Firefighters pulled her out alive. Inside, the apartment was almost destroyed. Only after the shock subsided did she realize that someone had also stolen her gold jewelry and small valuables, and that the only person who had been in her flat before the fire was the doctor. In another case, gas taps in an apartment were turned on after the injection. If everything had gone according to Petrov's plan, the victim would have died from a combination of gas and drug effects, and the scene would have looked like a tragic accident. Instead, the situation was discovered and disaster was narrowly avoided. On the 2nd February 1999, Petrov's crimes escalated irreversibly. That day, he arrived at another patient's home, following the same script as always. He presented himself as a doctor, used his list as proof of legitimacy, and was allowed inside. He examined the patient, then gave an injection that left them helpless. Once the victim was unconscious, he began to rob the flat, moving through the rooms with the calm of a man who had done this many times before. Then the front door opened. The patient's daughter came home. She saw a stranger where no stranger should have been, a man going through her family's possessions while her relative lay motionless nearby. In that moment, Petrov's safety evaporated. He did not run. He did not try to talk his way out. He attacked. He grabbed a screwdriver and stabbed the daughter, killing her. Then he strangled the unconscious patient with a stocking, ensuring that no one from that flat would live to testify against him. This was his 30th robbery. It was also a turning point. 2 murders committed not in panic, but as a calculated decision to preserve his scheme. After this, the line between robbery and murder largely disappeared in his methods. Knowing how much danger a single surviving witness posed, Petrov increasingly chose to use lethal doses and more extreme measures. What had started as just theft under the cover of medicine had now fully transformed into a series of murders executed with clinical precision. After the double murder, Petrov's approach grew colder and more systematic. He began to rely on lethal combinations of drugs, tailoring them to his victim's age and health conditions to make deaths look like natural outcomes. He knew how weakened hearts fail. He knew how strokes present. He knew what a normal death in a sick, elderly patient was supposed to look like. He used that knowledge against them. His visits followed a chillingly consistent pattern. Arrive with a medical bag and calm demeanor, perform a basic examination to appear professional, administer a therapeutic injection, wait for the victim to become helpless or die, rob the flat in some cases, set the scene on fire. From the outside, the city saw random tragedies: an old man dying alone in his bed, an old woman suffocating in a fire, another pensioner found dead after a visit from a doctor. The deaths blended into the background noise of post-Soviet life. Too many old people, too little care, too many accidents. By the time investigators finally connected the dots, Petrov was suspected in up to 19 deaths and several serious injuries. 6 of his victims survived his attacks but were left with severe harm. Ultimately, the court would convict him of 11 murders and 47 robberies. But those numbers are only part of the story. The true damage he did cannot be measured just in corpses. It lives on in the families who realized too late that the person they had trusted was the one who destroyed everything. For years, Petrov's crimes hid in plain sight. The police in St. Petersburg were overwhelmed. They had gang wars, organized crime, domestic violence, street murders, cases that screamed for attention with blood and spectacle. Against that background, quiet deaths of sick pensioners did not stand out. But some people started to notice strange coincidences. Relatives of different victims mentioned similar details: a doctor who arrived without being called, a quick exam, an injection, and then a sudden collapse or blackout. Survivors told investigators that they had lost consciousness immediately after a shot and woke up to find valuables missing. In a few cases, neighbors remembered seeing a doctor leaving the building shortly before smoke filled the stairwell. At first, these testimonies were scattered. Different police departments handled different incidents. The robberies looked small compared to larger criminal operations. The fires looked like accidents. Only when someone compared the names of victims with the lung patients' list did the pattern snap into focus. Many of the dead and robbed had one thing in common: they were on the same medical list, connected to the same health center, and had been visited by a man claiming to be from that clinic. The randomness vanished. What remained was the outline of a predator moving through a very specific group of people. Once the health center connection was clear, the scale of the threat became terrifying. Investigators realized that the same lung list that Petrov had used as a hunting guide still existed, and it contained 72 people who were still alive. Any of them could be next. Each address was a possible crime scene waiting to happen. The response was unprecedented for this type of case. Police launched an operation called Medbrat, or male nurse. Around 700 officers were deployed to monitor, protect, and effectively ambush the man they now believed was behind the deaths. Plainclothes officers were stationed near the homes of patients on the list. Some stayed with the pensioners inside their flats. Others waited in stairwells, courtyards, and unmarked cars nearby. Their mission was simple but dangerous: wait for the doctor. They knew he arrived in daylight. They knew he carried a medical bag. They knew he preferred quiet buildings where nobody asked questions. For the first time, the predator was no longer the only one planning his movements. The city itself had turned into a net, waiting to close. On 17th January 2000, that net finally tightened. Petrov visited yet another patient from the lung list, fully expecting another easy job. He followed the same script: calm voice, medical pretext, examination. But this time, the walls had ears. Police moved in and arrested him during the visit. The man who had come so many times as help now left as a prisoner. After his arrest, Petrov's double life collapsed quickly. In his flat, investigators found stolen property that could be tied directly to victims and crime scenes: jewelry, valuables, personal items families recognized as missing after doctor visits. Some items had already been sold on the black market, but enough remained to build a strong evidentiary chain. 6 survivors gave testimony describing how they had been injected by a doctor and then lost consciousness, only to wake up robbed or badly injured. Relatives of the dead described the same pattern: an unexpected visit from a doctor, followed soon after by sudden death or disaster. Petrov was suspected of 19 murders and tried for 17. The court examined dozens of episodes involving robbery, injection, and suspicious death. He initially confessed to the murders during questioning. Later, he tried to withdraw his confession, claiming that he had been under psychological pressure while in custody. But by that point, the pattern of evidence spoke louder than his attempts to deny. In 2002, the court reached its decision. Petrov was found guilty of 11 murders, multiple attempted murders, and 47 robberies committed under the guise of medical care. Judge Valentina Kudryashova sentenced him to life imprisonment. Media labeled him Dr. Death and Dr. Killer, adding him to the grim list of healthcare serial killers who turned their professional knowledge into a weapon. In court, he did not look like a monster. He looked like an ordinary, slightly worn-out man, thin, bespectacled, quiet. The only difference was that now he sat not at a patient's bedside, but inside a metal or glass cage reserved for serious criminals. Maxim Vladimirovich Petrov is now serving his life sentence in a Russian penal colony. Reports have surfaced suggesting he has tried or may try to pursue early release opportunities after decades behind bars, sparking public anger and fear. For many, the idea that Dr. Death could walk free again is almost unthinkable. His daily reality is now the opposite of what it once was. Instead of moving freely through the city, he is confined to a closed, controlled environment. Instead of visiting patients, he is monitored by guards. But even locked away, his story continues to echo. His case appears in discussions of medical ethics, criminal profiling, and failures of post-Soviet institutions. He is cited alongside other infamous medical killers as a warning about what happens when oversight collapses and one person gains too much unchecked access to vulnerable lives. For the families of his victims, however, he is not a case study. He is a hole in their family photographs, an empty chair at the table, a face that was last seen trusting a doctor at the door. The story of Maxim Vladimirovich Petrov is not just about one man and his crimes. It is about a terrifying vulnerability built into modern life. We trust doctors because we have to. Most people cannot read their own X-rays, interpret their own lab results, or evaluate their own treatment plans. When a doctor says, "You need this injection," we almost never argue. Petrov exploited that blind spot perfectly. He did not drag his victims off the street. He did not threaten them with visible weapons. He used the tools and language of care, a stethoscope, calm explanations, and a needle. He chose people who were already struggling to breathe, to walk, to live alone. People who needed help so badly that they opened their doors without hesitation. Most serial killers have to earn their victims' trust before they strike. Petrov started where trust was absolute. His case forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If someone in a white coat, carrying a medical bag, rings your doorbell and speaks confidently about your health, would you let them in? For at least 11 people in St. Petersburg, the answer was yes. They followed the rules. They did what they were supposed to do, and it cost them everything. Evil does not always knock like a stranger. Sometimes it arrives like help. Sometimes it speaks softly, writes notes on a clipboard and says, "This will only hurt for a second.